Stardust, Chapter 27, Part 2. Frank caught Shen's eye and the engineer spoke next.
Once we're done here, we can all get a good night's sleep. In the morning, Matt and I are gonna run some tests using the first generation of inventions that you inspired. If you're up for it, we'd love for you to come by and see how things turned out. You are the inspiration for it all, so I'd love to get feedback from you before things go into production.
Twilight's expression rose and her ears perked up as she looked to Shen.
Well, that sounds like fun.
Matt stopped at the door to the EA reactor and Shen opened the door with a swipe of his badge and the group filed into the next room. Rather than being a proper room like one of the engineering workshops or the science labs, the other side of the door opened into another hallway, running parallel to the main corridor. A small staircase and a door were at the end of the hallway to the left, where Shen led the group. This last door opened up into a control room with dozens of computer monitors as well as a window looking over another chamber. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive cylinder, and around the perimeter was a series of small cylinders that were laced from end to end with Elerium circuits and mind-boggling patterns. Masses of cables could be seen sprouting from both ends of the central cylinder, which disappeared under the grated floor and ceiling.
That's actually really clever, Charles.
Twilight said as her eyes fell upon the collection of cylinders around the central section.
I'm assuming the smaller arrays work in tandem to create more power than one larger array? Or was there some sort of safety concern that was addressed by using this arrangement? Oh wait, perhaps the redundancy allowed for backups in the event of a failure? Or...
The unicorn began to trail off with more and more theories before Shen stopped her.
Well, our first testing indicated the arrays generated heat when powered, so a rotation system was developed to allow for continuous power generations while allowing a minimum of half the circuits to stay deactivated to cool.
Shen explained with a smile.
I suppose you could say it's a combination of safety concerns alongside the anticipated lifespan of the generator itself.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. So, when do we get to turn it on?
Twilight asked with a note of eagerness that made the engineer's smile morph into a grin.
Oh, we'll be turning it on in just a moment. We actually need you to exercise your gifts to start it, but before we get to that, I need to warn you. So, there will be other humans in the room on the other side of this glass. They won't be able to see us, but they'll be able to hear us. So I'll need you to be very quiet once the testing starts, okay?
When Twilight nodded, Shen continued.
When I give the startup command, I want you to channel your magic into the cylinder closest to us. Okay?
I understand. I think? Well, can I ask why?
The unicorn asked as she threw a curious look at the generator.
You certainly can. I dare say you should never stop asking why.
Shen replied with a chuckle, and when Twilight turned that curious look back at him, he shrugged.
Sorry, I'll explain that a bit later. As to why we need you, the generator can't start on its own, and once we get it started, it should be self-sustaining.
Twilight nodded, and Shen brought his radio headset up to his ears and turned it on.
Alright, gentlemen, report to the EA reactor, and let's get started.
Several moments of silence passed before a handful of bleary-eyed engineers shuffled into the generator's main chamber. Most assumed positions at computer consoles situated around the room, but one turned towards Shen in the control booth and gave a thumbs up.
We're all set, more or less. Ready when you are. Right then. So our initial startup target is 20% of maximum theoretical power. If we can reach that, we'll go from there. Begin startup sequence now,
Shen said, and turned to Twilight, who obligingly looked to the cylinder nearest the window before closing her eyes. The patterns of Elerium lit up along the surfaces of the cylinder, and a bass hum filled the chamber.
Startup appears to be successful and the system is registering a power flow. Well, congratulations folks, we just made history.
Twilight cut off her channeling to look at the generator, and her eyes widened as the Elerium from the second and third cylinders began to light up.
Wait, so how much electricity is this making?
The engineer held up one finger to his mouth to signal for silence before turning on the intercom from the control booth to the generator's main room.
How is the electrical output when compared to our conventional generators?
Shen asked.
Still climbing. The generators just passed 100% output from the regular generators. 120%, 250%, 530%. Is this supposed to be doing this?
One of the engineers finished with a small note of alarm. A beeping signal came from one of the consoles, which prompted another engineer to run over it.
Temperature from the modules is still increasing dramatically. At this rate, they'll burn out before their cooling cycles start. Fuck, the generator. The temperature in the chamber is increasing.
Another engineer reported quickly as he looked over his shoulder at the cylinders around the generator was gradually beginning to glow red. The bass rumbling from the generator had also begun to rattle the window to the control booth.
Charles?
Twilight asked, and he could see the unicorn give him a worried look out of the corner of his eye.
Reduce the power to 10%!
Shen shouted as his hands flew over the consoles available to him. A chorus of acknowledgements answered him, followed by a series of increasingly alarmed updates.
Reduce the power to 1% and prepare for emergency cooling!
One of Shen's hands threw back the glass shield over a large red button, and his hand hovered over it as he looked through the window at the generator. The window's vibration gradually lowered and then ceased, and the casings around the generator appeared to cool as well. Shen let out a very brief sigh of relief before sinking back into his chair.
Oh, okay. Heat is returning back to acceptable levels and the power is leveling out at just over 800% of the standard generator output,
an engineer said as he ran from one monitor to another.
I think we're stable.
Good work then, gentlemen. I'll hang around the control booth to make sure these levels are maintained. You kids, go get some rest. I expect one of you to relieve me in the morning, Shen said, which elicited a chuckle from the engineers as they gathered to exit the chamber. When the last engineer disappeared behind the door, Shen turned to Twilight and the others. I'll be staying here to supervise for the rest of the night. You should get Twilight back to her room and then get some rest yourselves. We have a busy day tomorrow.
Oh, well, okay. I'll see you in the morning,
Twilight said, her good cheer fast returning now that the unexpected excitement of the generator startup was finished. She followed Matt and Zhang out of the room while Frank stayed behind. When the door closed behind the trio, Shen let out a ragged breath he didn't know he had been holding as he slid the glass shield back over the red button. His hands noticeably shook despite his best efforts to prevent it.
Charles, what exactly is involved with emergency cooling?
Frank asked as he set his eyes upon the engineer.
The chamber would be flooded with liquid nitrogen to prevent the generator from melting down until it could be ejected or the base evacuated.
The fates of those inside the chamber didn't require elaboration.
You're serious? What about the other failsafes? Surely there's a cutoff or something that could deactivate the reactor safely.
Frank's wide-eyed stare was fixed upon Shen before he stole a glance into the now calm reactor.
The reactor, once started, is self-sustaining. It cannot be deactivated now barring physical damage to the Elerium circuitry, the Elerium itself wearing down to nothing, or the catastrophic meltdown. As to what the meltdown would entail, we don't quite know. The reactor just might overheat and melt, or it might crack the planet in half, Shen explained before reaching under his desk to produce a bottle of liquor and a glass. I had hoped that this might be a good way to toast our success, but, well, the mood doesn't seem quite right.
The engineer unscrewed the cap and poured himself a measure of the alcohol in the glass to offer to Frank when the doctor stepped forward and snatched the bottle from him.
May God have mercy on our souls,
he said as he took a long swig straight from the bottle before slamming it down onto the table.
May God have mercy indeed,
Shen agreed as he watched the doctor exit the control booth.